And welcome to another edition of South Texas Crossfire. This is attorney Joe Flores reminding you to join us each and every week right here on KTMB with the Lopez family. Special thanks to Don Humberto Lozano Lopez. He passed away in 2011, but he's honored, he's venerated, and he's never forgotten. And my good friend Carlos Lopez, you guessed it, the Ted Turner of South Texas Broadcasting. And let's not forget all our friends out there who make it happen and our sponsors. And today I'm very honored in a continuing series about incarceration in Texas and in the United States. I brought on Ray Hill last time. You know him from Prison Talk. And now I'm honored to bring on a wonderful documentarian, filmmaker that's been highly acclaimed through her efforts in the past, and that's ALISON Armstrong. Welcome, ALISON. Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, Joe. Delighted to be on your show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and I appreciate you coming on. And you know, right on the cusp of me finishing a federal sentencing, I want to tell you that you are on my mind driving back 2 hours because you are passionate about incarceration. And just for everybody out there, I'm going to frame this on the conversation that we're having. 1 in 100 Texans, 1 in 100 American citizens is incarcerated or on supervised release. Ladies and gentlemen out there, we incarcerate more people than China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and other third world countries. We are leading the pack in incarcerating people in the world. What are your thoughts on that after you've done your research? I know you came down here to Texas, Houston, and did a great documentary that you're doing the finishing touches on, or you've already finished?
No, we are about to do the rough cut, Joe. I've been working on this documentary for 8 years, and I have followed John Bice now through 5 separate parole hearings. And I have to say, I'm really stunned by the prison system in Texas and by the justice system. I'm very surprised not only at the large number of people that are incarcerated, but the length of sentences that you dish out to people on a regular basis, especially juveniles. And it's been proven so clearly that lengthy prison terms do nothing whatsoever to see crime rates decline. It has no effect on the crime at all.
And I'm so elated to have you on because we are getting a perspective from someone that is, well, to say the least, objective, because you're from another country. People that are listening out there say, well, she doesn't speak with an accent, but you are Canadian.
I am indeed Canadian, though I'm married to an American, I have to say. But I am certainly Canadian. And when I started this documentary, our justice system, I would say, was a more merciful one compared to yours. But unfortunately now, Canada has begun to imitate jurisdictions like Texas, just at a time when you're doing a U-turn and coming to the conclusion that what you've been doing with incarceration is not working.
Well, and you know, to give a sort of framework that what we're talking about, let's turn to why you came to Texas back after Katrina in 2005, and you're meeting Ray Hill. What circumstances led you to come down here to Texas?
Well, I was covering for CBC, that's the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I was actually working on a post-Katrina story to see how Texans and Houstonians were dealing with the situation. They were showing a lot of hospitality to people from New Orleans who'd lost their homes. So it was kind of a heartwarming story. And during that time, I happened to be introduced to Ray Hill, who told me the story of the Paul Broussard murder. And I was surprised for so many reasons. I was, first of all, shocked that Ray was the one to help the police crack the case and see 10 kids go to jail. And in fact, the one kid is still in jail. But that he was the one who first helped the murderer, reached out to him once he was behind bars, and has been working for his parole. So it struck me as a very surprising story.
Well, and you know, that's the really surprising part of it, as you say, because Ray led the charge, and in fact, it was what the media termed it as a hate crime, but that's not necessarily what really happened. But the lesbian and the gay and community there in Houston really got behind this case because they did frame it that John Bice had committed among others, a gay bash murder of Paul Broussard. So using that, I think that the irony or the twist here is that Ray led the charge to get this prosecuted, and then on his other hat is ending mass incarceration. So he saw this juvenile almost getting in post-adolescent getting sentenced, and then he is now on the other side trying to help him get free. In fact, he did get parole or parole eligible in 2011 through the help of lawyer Bill Hayburn, but then what happened?
Well, John was granted parole, and I went up with a crew to a penitentiary in Colorado City, and we interviewed John after he found out that he had made parole, and he was pretty tense about it. He was pretty edgy about it, but he was relieved, and so was his father, I have to say. And my crew, who've seen a lot of people incarcerated over the years, I must say, were very pleased to discover that John was going to be released. But then the parole board rescinded his parole for reasons that they never made public. So for secret reasons, they withdrew John's parole.
And me as a Texas lawyer, I can tell you from my perspective that there is unanimous voting. There's a lot of political what I would say would be chicanery that's going on in that system, and we don't know. It's like a secret, the Coke formula or something. You know, we don't know who gets parole and who doesn't. What was your experience with the parole board?
Well, it was very interesting. The parole board a number of times refused to speak with me, and the parole board are political appointments. So I think that they simply rubber stamp whatever their political masters determine they have to do. I think they're probably decent people, but I think they have to figure out which way the wind blows if they want to keep their job. So there was no reason given for why John's parole was rescinded. And John himself, neither John nor his lawyer had ever seen his parole files. So it's one of those cases where you are being accused of something, but you don't know what you're being accused of, which is it goes against your Constitution. Your Constitution makes provisions for people to know who their accusers are and to have the right to confront them. But in the parole law in Texas, there is no right to know what you've been accused of while you're in prison. Prisoners have no rights.
Well, and it's a very highly secretive system, as you say, and I saw, and I want everybody on the internet or on their handheld to go to kickstarter.com/projects and look for The Guy with the Knife. And that is by ALISON Armstrong, and it gives a great synopsis of what you're looking at, and it underlines that the media, political interest, and special interest groups can sway the parole board.
Well, that's right. I think that people become fearful of crime. But what Texans have to know is that crime has actually been declining over the past 2 decades. But that hasn't kept pace with the decline in the prison population. So I think that the media tends to sensationalize crime. And as a result, people get frightened and they think, well, put these murderers away for long prison terms and we won't have to deal with them. But what they don't understand is that it's very few people who commit acts of violence. And what you need to know about John Bice is that even the people who oppose his parole, most of them have said he poses no danger to the community if he is ever released. He'll never kill again. He'll never harm anybody. John Bice is completely reformed by all accounts.
And didn't he receive an education while in prison?
He has 3 associate's degrees. He has 2 associate's degrees. He has a Bachelor of Science in psychology. He's currently doing a master's in sociology. He has high level of certification, both from Microsoft and Cisco Systems. He's an accomplished silversmith, and he served as a peer counselor in prison, teaching numeracy and literacy to other inmates. He's highly educated. He's even been offered a job when he gets out.
Yeah, and even one of our Supreme Court justices said that the prison sentences, not just in Texas but the United States, are far too long, and they're cruel. Even Eric Holder, our own, U.S. attorney, says that we are incarcerating people in the United States for far too long for no good reason at all. And the sentencing guidelines in federal really underline that. Just for drug possession, you can get longer than any sex offender or somebody that harmed a child. You can get treble or quadruple or even 5 or 6 times exponentially the amount just for a first-time drug offense, which makes no sense to most of us in the legal community, if not the population in general. And the way we're incarcerating aliens, the irony is that they're saying we don't want aliens, turn them back, but when we do catch them and they re-enter, we put them in and we end up paying upwards of $100,000 to house and feed them. And I think
that's absolutely true.
The
cost of prison is prohibitive. I think it's about $40,000 on average, but it's going up all the time. And prisons make people sick. What you have to remember is that when you're in prison, you're more likely to get sick. So the cost of medical care for inmates is also quite high. But Amnesty International has said that Texas prisons are among the worst in the Western world. They are certainly cruel.
Well, I mean, you go in somewhere where the heat index is 110, there's no AC. There's not really any meaningful sort of activity other than they'll give you a Bible and they'll store you in somewhere where it's 110 degrees heat index. And really you don't see that in many other places other than, prisons like Angola in Louisiana, which were just till about a generation ago, they were also rated as some of the most cruel and it was just tantamount to slavery in there.
Well, your prison system certainly in the South is built on a plantation model. And after slavery ended, the prison systems got going in a big way. So one system simply replaced another. And so you incarcerate people in the United States, as far as I can see, for simply being poor. And if you can't afford a lawyer, you're not going to have justice done. And so more poor people are in prisons than rich ones. And they're not getting an education in prison, and prisons are supposed to be rehabilitative, but in fact they're often just training grounds for greater criminal activity.
And you bring up a great point, because a lot of people don't realize about the gangs and the violence, and really you graduate to being able to perform more crime and really get a criminal sort of mentality by being in there for long periods of time. What does John have to say about all this? When you interviewed him, and I can't wait to see the documentary. Very excited about it. I know this has been a long road for you. What are John's thoughts about everything that's going on?
Well, I mean, he says what most people say, that until you've sat on the other side of the bars, you don't really know what prison is about. John has kept to himself in prison. By all reports, he's kept to himself. He has stayed away from the gangs. He has stayed away from the drugs. And he has worked very, very hard to get an education in a Texas prison, in a series of Texas prisons. And that has been to his everlasting credit. I think he has done something that is extremely tough to do. And during the time that John has been incarcerated, he turned, on March 12th of this year, John turned 40 years old. He's now spent 22 years in prison. And in that time, he has never had an act of violence on his record, which is remarkable for somebody who went to prison for committing murder.
Yes. And as far as recidivism, the research that we've done here at South Texas Crossfire, that over 35, it's extremely unlikely that somebody's going to commit another crime of violence after 35 or hurt somebody, and especially as young as he was when he went in. This is not, of course, the crime was very serious. We're not trying to minimize what happened, but the way, again, you point out something valid with the cop shows, with the media, with politics playing a role. They really, the irony of it is that Ray Hill led the charge to put him away for a long time. But
he did. Ray Hill also exaggerated, I have to say, in the first instance of the crime. And I think Ray was very emotionally upset because he had one of his own lovers murdered himself, Ray did. So he was tired of the police not doing anything. But originally, when the police investigated the crime, they said it was not a hate crime. It was Ray who said it was a hate crime, and from then, everything changed. So when it became a hate crime, suddenly everybody got involved. The FBI even came to Houston at that time. And after that, the media took it and ran with the story, and forever after, John was labeled as a homophobic murderer. There is no evidence that I've been able to find from anyone to suggest that John was ever homophobic. He had gay friends before he went to prison, and he has had gay friends in prison. There's nothing to suggest that John Bice committed a hate crime or that he hated gay men.
Well, and Ray takes ownership of that in your documentary. I mean, he comes out and says it. I led the charge, but then I saw the ramifications of what that caused a young man. And now, in the second chapter of this, when Ray comes back and tries to help this young man, what has unfolded, or how has Ray felt about it now?
Well, Ray was quite right to solve the murder. He was quite right to push the police to solve yet another murder of yet another gay man. But the year that Paul Broussard was murdered, there were 671 homicides in Houston that year. And that was only the third highest tally during that decade. So Ray was quite right to do what he did. He was wrong, and he has said he was wrong to call it a hate crime.
And even with that, the parole board still kept him till 2011, and in fact, he's still incarcerated today.
That is right. There's still a perception that John Bice is a homophobic murderer, and it's completely at odds with who the person is. There's also a perception that John Bice committed a premeditated murder, and I can tell you, I spoke to the prosecuting attorney who was able to extract the 45-year sentence. The plea bargain John took was a 45-year plea bargain, and he told me, and I have this on camera, that he does not believe that John Bice set out that night to kill Paul Broussard. So he does not believe it was premeditated, but there's a widespread public perception that it was a premeditated crime, and that is just not the case.
You know, looking at this documentary and, you know, seeing the clip that we're going to go to here momentarily, and you know, I hope we can show that to people who want to go to Kickstart with your permission.
Sure, absolutely.
Because I'm
more than happy to let you show it.
This has been a great journey for you, and so much money and time this has gone into this because of your seeking social justice. I just want the listeners out there, everyone, y que también hablan nuestro idioma español, que me escuchan mi voz y también viéndome en televisión, that are seeing and hearing me and my voice. Why are you doing this documentary? What is it that you want people that see this documentary to walk away with? To maybe a paradigm shift in thinking about incarceration in America and in the world?
I think incarceration, putting a person in prison, should be a last resort. Only the most dangerous offenders should ever go to prison. There are many other ways of treating people. I think if you were to beef up drug and alcohol counseling for teenagers, if you were to work with half of the people in prisons are mentally ill, you were to beef up supports for mental illness and healthcare prevention, you could shrink your prisons in a very short time. But again, my message is this: prison is a last resort. For any civilized society, it is a last resort.
You mentioned in Canada that they're taking sort of the Texas route to things, and you know, one of the issues that I'm always looking at is that and this is my opinion, doesn't reflect the station or anyone else's, but my firsthand experience as an attorney in the federal system and in the state system is privatization of prisons is the anathema of what's going on, that rehabilitation is going down the tubes because of the financial incentives to make mass incarceration a big profit industry in the 21st century. What are your thoughts on it?
I do not believe prisons should be privatized because it's a business, and any business wants to grow itself. So a prison business has a reason to want to grow itself, and it lobbies politicians for stiffer sentences for even misdemeanors because it has a reason, it benefits from it. So why would you in a civilized society encourage people to make a profit from crime?
Yeah, there's the juvenile system too. There's a hot race out here in Texas, in South Texas right now, for the juvenile justice system. Who will be the judge for that? What is your research and your team discovering about juvenile sentences here in Texas and in the U.S.?
Well, I was very stunned, actually. I happened to go and film the exterior of the Clemens unit, which was the unit that John was first put in when he went to prison. And it's a penitentiary for children, for 14 to 18-year-olds. And I do not believe any civilized society should incarcerate its children. I think there's something very wrong with a society that incarcerates 14-year-olds. I mean, perhaps if they're very seriously dangerous, that's one thing, but most of these kids are in for drug offenses.
The thing that a lot of people may not know, but they sure know about the case, is the Texas tragedy that you were the documentary producer and writer on, and you received acclaim for through the New York City Radio Award, which I commend you on, was about Andrea Yates. And I think people recall that still about Andrea Yates. And could you touch a little bit upon that?
Well, that is a tragedy that could have been prevented. Andrea Yates murdered her children, 5 children. She drowned them all in a postpartum depression. And the psychiatrist who had been treating her told her told her husband that she should not be left alone with her children. And people simply did not support Andrea. She should have been placed in a facility so that she should have been put in a mental health institution for a while, at least, so she could get her depression under control. But people wanted to kill her, and they wanted to put her to death for being mentally ill. And I mean, I don't know how much more tragedy you can have than to kill your own children. This was a woman who desperately loved her children, and in fact, her only wish after she was sentenced was to be buried with her children. So again, I think prevention is the key here. You've got to reach out to people who are suffering from mental illness and prevent these things. A little bit of money put up front to help people who are struggling in this way can save untold tragedy down the road.
Well, and Andrea Yates is just one of many stories. And I always like to explore why great documentarians and people with a lot of talent put up so much time, so much money, so much effort. A lot of volunteer work has gone on here, and thus Kickstarter.com, the project's The Guy with a Knife, and that's appearing in front of your screen if you want to help learn more. But why do you do what you do? And a lot of people say, this is so depressing, but there's a lot of actual hope and redemption and a lot more that goes into this rather than just, saying this is just a desperate situation that we can't do anything about. Why do you do what you do?
I think I'm driven to do what I do because I'm curious. I want to know how we came to this situation as a society at this time in history. And I see tremendous amounts of hope. I mean, in the story of John Bice, I see a huge amount of hope. I think when John gets out, he will be a poster boy for what somebody can do inside prison. And I think that he is a person who can help stop Texans from putting so much money into incarcerating people. People will see that there are those who are in prison who can be redeemed. And the other part of the story here is that I think it's to Ray Hill's credit that he reached out to John, and it's to John's credit that he reached out to Ray, and that their friendship is really the story here, because that's what we need to do with inmates, and we need to do with people who are accused of crimes. We shouldn't just lock them up and forget about them. We need to reach out to them and help them to improve their lives.
Well, we're playing to a Texas audience too, so I hear this a lot on the other side is, they'll tell me, Joe, how can you represent these people? And my answer to them is, under the Constitution, everyone has a right to have a competent defense, but there are some cases I won't take. Some cases for personal reasons that I won't take. But we hear a lot from the other side of the equation here in Texas, the victim panel, people that say, well, tough. He murdered somebody in cold blood. He deserves to rot or get capital punishment. Or their anger about this. We just covered somebody the other day who we were trying to get a medical parole for, and they wouldn't let him. He applied 7 times, and they did not get, and he's dying of cancer. And they want him to die in jail because the victim's spouse says, no way, I will object and go to each and every parole hearing. There's no way that so it's something hard to overcome. What have you encountered with the family of the victim, in this case, the Broussard family?
Well, Nancy Rodriguez, Paul Broussard's mother, doesn't want John to get out of prison until he's served at least 27 years in jail. And she wants him to serve that length of time because that's how old her son was when he was murdered. And I don't think that I feel tremendous sadness and sorrow for Nancy Rodriguez. I cannot imagine what it would be like to have your child killed or murdered. But 2 wrongs don't make a right. And that old adage is still true. We have a prison system that has to be just, it has to be fair, it has to be merciful, it has to be compassionate. And I am constantly astonished when I'm in Texas at the constant references to Christianity and to Jesus.
Right.
And yet the prison system seems completely at odds with a culture of Christianity that so many Texans espouse.
Oh, and they give you a Bible when you go in. You get the jailhouse religion, and they'll tell you about God and everything. But what about redemption, forgiveness, and a second chance? That's sort of an oxymoron with what's going on in the prison system.
Well, who is famous for talking about second chances is George Bush, George W. He said that America is the land of second chances. And that is a quote from him about the prison system. And he said, when somebody comes out of jail, there should be a door and a better road ahead. And
but that's not reality. I think that's just rose-colored glasses and cockeyed optimism, in my opinion, all due respect to George W. I think that's not what's happening.
It may be, but I think it's no less true. I think that there is a growing awareness in Texas, from what I've seen, that across the entire political spectrum, that the prison system isn't working. It's expensive socially and economically, and you can't afford to keep it.
Well,
the damage it does is extensive.
Well, I always tell everybody on the show, since I run it like a lawyer there, I say, closing arguments. I want to thank you for coming on. We've got about 3 minutes. The floor is yours. Please, anything you'd like to cover that we haven't covered, or to inform our viewers and listeners, because we're going to simultaneously broadcast this on radio and on social media platforms. What would you like to tell our viewers and listeners?
Well, I would like to say that I think prisoners have rights too. And when the law is broken, as it has been in this case, there's this documentary has led to 2 criminal investigations. And the first criminal investigation was because the victim's rights advocate, Andy Kahn, leaked portions of John's prison file to the media. And Andy Kahn told me on camera that he received that from a sitting member of the Texas legislature. And Andy leaked that information. Andy Kahn said on camera, Andy Kahn is a victim's rights advocate in Houston. He works for the Houston Police Department. And he told me on camera that he received John Bice's confidential prison file from a member of the Texas legislature. So he said that John wasn't this perfect inmate because he had infractions against him, and he told me what the infractions were. I asked him if he knew what the infractions meant, And he said he did not. Well, I found out later from John's lawyer that the infractions referred to things like owning an extra pair of shorts and hanging his laundry up an hour after it was supposed to be taken down. So, in fact, the infractions amounted to nothing. They were very small misdemeanors. But Andy Kahn wanted to make hay out of that because he wanted to keep John in prison. And he broke the law by leaking that file to me and to others in the media. So the state's attorney's office contacted me, and I sent them portions of the transcript and the interview with Andy, and they launched a criminal investigation. Then they closed the investigation, and it went nowhere. The next thing I heard from a sergeant in the Houston Police Department who was in charge of internal investigations, and she said they had opened an internal investigation into the leakage of that information by Andy Kahn, because he works for the police. And it's my understanding that Andy Kahn has been disciplined, but I do not believe he's been charged with any crime. So it seems to me that there are two classes of people: those people who can get away with breaking the law, and those people who cannot. So if justice is not fairly and evenly applied, I don't think you can say that you have a just society.
Well, very well said. ALISON Armstrong and her new documentary coming out soon, The Guy with a Knife. Please go to www.kickstarter.com/The Guy with a Knife, and we'll have that whole link up there for you that you can go. It has been an honor to have you on, and thank you for everything that you're doing. We're behind you here at South Texas Crossfire because we're on the front line. Me, myself, as a federal practitioner and a state practitioner, I'm very familiar with the injustices that go on in the long sentences. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
My pleasure, Joe. Great to meet you.
Well, and the last thing I wanted to just say that you've got some great people that are working with you on the documentary, and I understand Jerry Hatton is an award-winning cinematographer, and I just saw it right away. When you see that clip, it is just something else. It just blows you away. I can't wait to see the whole thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Jerry's a Houstonian, and he's a wonderful cinematographer.
Awesome, awesome. And Tom Schlesinger and everybody else who's on there with HBO documentaries he's done. You've got a great team. And again, we have the link that you can go to. And with that, we leave ALISON Armstrong. We're going to be back after these messages. But thank you so much for everything you've done, ALISON. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Joe.
Bye.
Prison system here in Texas is big business. Big business. My son got caught up in the law. He's been in some of the worst prisons Texas has to offer. Society don't want you back. You're an outcast when you go to prison here in Texas. The system will work its hardest to put you back in.
This brings to mind elements of a police state, these secrets that will keep you in prison forever.
There's a lot of law and there's a little justice.
And you've been watching South Texas Crossfire. This interview has been phenomenal. It's part of a series on mass incarceration, ending mass incarceration in Texas. Folks, we got to pay for it up front. We're using prisons as mental health facilities. We're using prisons to house kids where we used to, at the most, give them a paddling or suspend them. Now they're putting them in jail. We're using mass incarceration as a solution where it should be the very last thing you think about. And it's because there are profit motives. There are politicians that are being bought by these special interest groups. And I'll say it again, being bought by these special interest groups that have mass prisons, private prisons. And that's not the way to go. Prison is to reform. And it is, we are all within Christ's redemption. And packing somebody in a prison, locking them away, and throwing away the key is not the solution, because we all pay for it. Even from a conservative point of view, and you're looking at it from fiscal conservative, we are just paying for nothing. And if people knew how many people that illegally entered, instead of giving them the right to work here half the year and going back paying taxes, we're locking them up and paying $40,000 minimum if they're healthy. Ladies and gentlemen, contact your representative. You can go to peopleoverprofits.org, find out who your representative is, handwrite them a letter, tell them stop mass incarceration. People need to be punished, but not the taxpayer, for years and years upon end. And these people aging out in prison, and their last few years we've got to pay for in medical care. So we've got to totally ratchet up what we're doing, change the system, stop these long and senseless sentences in federal court, and also these sentences that make people habitual, all this stuff that they put them away for. Victims need to have their protection and their families, and my heart goes out to them. We really mean that. The other issue is that, are we going to pay for longer sentences? So keep that in mind. We're going to be bringing on more guests on this very hot topic, and thank you all for watching South Texas Crossfire. God bless.